You're whitewashing evil. I think that's something that I've heard sometimes. And I think for a lot of people that makes sense, where your experience, because of how siloed our media is, and like because of the impacts of things like residential segregation, we know more what people think, but we have less concept of how and why they think that. And so, when every liberal in the media is depicted as Antifa, or every conservative is Stephen Miller, and you're like, well, no, neither of those things. But I think that becomes particularly challenging, where it's like, is every conservative providing cover for Stephen Miller or for white nationalism? Is every liberal providing cover for Antifa or like the extreme far left? Well, no, but when we are so siloed that like the concept of being a liberal or a conservative becomes so polarized, I think that comes into this.
So in your experience, who has it been harder to break it down for? Do you think conservatives understand liberals better than liberals understand conservatives?
They think they do, and I don't think that's true. I don't think anyone understands anyone. I think one of the challenges also is like the existence of quote unquote the right or the left is kind of a canard. Whenever people on the conservatives are like, the left is in lockstep, I'm like, have you looked at Bernie Twitter? Like, no one's in lockstep about anything. Everybody's just screaming at each other and throwing, I don't know why Deval Patrick wants to take part in this, because that sounds deeply unpleasant. But, like, none of them understand the other. The conservative interpretation of liberals is not based on what liberals think or having conversations with liberals. It's based on, like, I read this Atlantic piece, and here's what I've gotten from that. Or it's based on, like, an interpretation based on nothingness. And it's sort of like how you talk to some people on the left about conservatism, and their entire idea of what conservatism it looks like is like, well, I read Breitbart sometimes. And I was just like, oh, buddy, you're okay. One, Breitbart is more populist, ethno-nationalist than anything else. I think that's challenging when it's not, you're learning about these things not from conversations with people, but conversations at people.
Maybe people will only start reading The Atlantic who are true believers because they have a paywall now. But that sounds like a good place to take a break. We'll be back after this promo. Stay close.
Chicago, the Windy City, the city of broad shoulders, the second city, is complicated.
Known for its legacies of segregation and political corruption, Chicago has a lot to grapple with.
On Chicagoland, we bring you conversations with activists, journalists, politicians, and others who are working to address these issues.
You can find Chicagoland wherever you listen to podcasts.
From University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts,
this is Chicagoland.
And we're back with Jane Coaston, reporter for Vox and co-host of The Weeds.
We wanted to come in strong on this second segment and ask a hypothetical. Mm-hmm. Right now, there's a lot of talk about impeaching President Trump. Mm-hmm. It seems very unlikely that Senate Republicans are actually going to remove him. He's overwhelmingly popular with the rank and file of his party. Mm-hmm. But we saw a lot of people come out on the left and protest in the Women's March and then also in the travel ban cases at airports. So let's say that Senate Republicans did actually remove the president. Do you think that people on the right would come out and march and protest?
It's challenging to say. One of the things about the Women's March, if you'll recall, is that like it began as an idea, but it was not literally just like women just being like, I'm going to DC today. It took organization. The only thing I could think in common would be something like the Tea Party rallies of 2010. I think that the idea of direct and popular action is much more widespread among progressives and liberals. So there will be a lot of talk about like where, taking to the streets or something like that. But one, what that would actually look like would probably be pretty localized. It wouldn't necessarily be like buses to DC. But also, I think that for people, particularly on the far right, the idea of collective action involves the word collective, which they're not super huge fans of. What would concern me is that I think there would be some elements that would respond to that with threats of violence. And not necessarily like collective action to protest, but an attempt to like use violence to respond. I don't think that would be very common. And I don't think I don't think we're going to get to this possibility at all. But I do think that, it would be different because the very conceits underlying what is necessarily to get thousands of people into the streets is different among conservatives. The inauguration crowds were small for President Trump, Not because people from out of state didn't come, but because people in D.C., we just, like, I remember walking around that day towards, like, near the metro, and it looked abandoned. Like, it looked like a zombie apocalypse had taken place. People were not, everybody was just kind of hiding in their apartment. And in comparison, I remember Obama's second election, people were asked to, like, come stay at our house, and it was just, like, a big thing. Because D.C., as many people seem to forget, is, like, 97% Democrat. D.C., actual D.C., like, real-life U Street, Shaw, Logan Circle D.C., is very different from, like, government D.C., and real D.C., Columbia Heights D.C., is not going to show up and protest the impeachment of the president. Like, they've got things to do.
Forgive me my ignorance. I'm only 2 months old in America, so this is all a little bit new for me. But you said that, you know, collective action and community organizing is anathema to the Republicans. If so, how are they successful? And we know they are in getting people to vote for them.
Well, one of those things is that Republicans have been very good at focusing on local action. So, which is kind of the entire point of conservatism. The idea of federalism, the idea that, like, small, like, states' rights and local communities, the focus on that, and the fact that, like, the idea of federal involvement is bad, has been something that's kind of been a part of the ethos of the party for a long time. So a lot of times people are not voting for the Republican Party. They are voting for the Republican who has been in office in my district forever, and no one's even opposing him because he always wins. You know, Barack Obama was very effective at becoming president, but he was not very effective at helping Democrats win down ballot races. And something you're seeing now is Democrats are winning down ballot races because there's been renewed emphasis on that, like with Run for Something and a bunch of other groups. One of the ways that Republicans have been able to win so effectively is because they have won in ways that are disconnected from the wider Republican Party. Yes, some of it has been, you know, more recently it's been reversed. Like now, down ballot Republicans are talking about how I'm running to help defend Trump, and down ballot Democrats are like, we need to fix this road. And guess who's winning? Down ballot Democrats. But, you know, growing up in Ohio, down ballot Republicans were talking about issues very specific to Cincinnati, very specific to like this particular area and representing a very particular area. And not talking so much about D.C. and spending a lot of time actually denigrating D.C. as like, you know, those fat cats in D.C. want to do blah, 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 but I'm standing up for blah, blah, blah. That's been very effective. And I think that that's something that Democrats now are starting to shift and change.
I was just wondering, what do you think it would actually take for Senate Republicans to remove the president? I think that the only thing that could force the number of Senate Republicans needed to vote to impeach would be if all of those Senate Republicans also decided to retire. I think that would be what was necessary. And especially because you can't, for a lot of Senate Republicans, and I'm working on a piece on this, they can argue that this was bad, but it's not impeachment worthy. But what they're basically saying is this is bad, and if this were a different president, we wouldn't like it. And if it were a Democrat, we would absolutely impeach. But in the current context, and I want to stay in Congress, I won't. So that would be what would be necessary. Now, we know that you're a co-host on The Weeds, and y'all love giving hot takes on The Weeds.
Well, Matt likes giving hot takes. My takes are like lukewarm.
And we also know that you've been in Chicago for the past couple of months, serving as a fellow with the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics.
So in honor of our sister show, Chicagoland, we wanted to combine the two and ask you a series of Chicago hot takes.
Oh, absolutely. I'm down.
Or lukewarm takes.
Okay.
All right, let's start with an easy one. University of Chicago or Northwestern?
University of Chicago. I went to Michigan, and my dad went to Northwestern, so yeah, University of Chicago.
Okay, Cubs or White Sox?
Cubs, because I have not yet met any White Sox fans, and I'm aware that the divide is like very strange and vaguely racialized, but I still have never met, I know one White Sox fan to like 60 Cubs fans. So
I think now you know two. I like the White Sox.
Oh, good.
Who's your favorite conservative from Chicago?
Former Republican Mayor Big Bill Thompson, who was like the griftiest, most corrupt politician in the history of time, and basically made a deal with Al Capone that was like, you can do whatever you want, just stop shooting people. And Al Capone was like, cool. And he was not a conservative, but I do kind of respect that level of chutzpah. Like, there's something about like old school Chicago machine politics where I'm like, you got nothing done and you were extremely corrupt, but you were really upfront about it. Al Capone kept, he had 3 portraits on the wall of his office, one of Abraham Lincoln, one of George Washington, and one of Big Bill Thompson. Also, every picture of Big Bill Thompson, he like, if you look at him and you were like, yeah, that's a corrupt guy. Like, he always wore pinstripe suits, and he just looks like someone who is just like, people just shove money in his pocket.
The best part about Chicago is?
The lake. It's beautiful. Driving down Lakeshore Drive is just gorgeous, especially because everyone is going 9 million miles an hour. I love all of the different neighborhoods and how they intersect or don't, and how there's so many different neighborhoods that have such a different part. I love that you could spend years and years here and never really get to all the neighborhoods. People keep asking me, like, oh, have you been to, like, Andersonville? I'm like, no, I have not yet gotten to Andersonville. And I love that. I love how local it is. I love what a hub it is. When I was growing up in Cincinnati, we basically thought of Chicago as being, like, attainable New York. And it really is. And it's such a beautiful place.
And the last and hottest of the takes, Chicago or DC?
DC. DC is the right size I believe a city should be. Because of DC's height limits, which were set up, it is not that buildings aren't allowed to be taller than the Washington Monument. It is actually based on an apartment building called the Castro, which is in Columbia Heights. And when it was built, it was like this giant apartment building, and everyone around it, in like, it was like the early 1900s, got real mad. And they were like, no more buildings taller than that. So it actually is that buildings cannot be taller than the width of the street they are next to. So that basically cuts everything off at 9 stories, which is why if you live in a 9-story apartment building, and from our roof, you can just see everything, and it's gorgeous. Also, I can walk from one side of the city to another in about like 2 hours. And in Chicago, I would die. Which I did not, like, I kept thinking, like, oh, like, Hyde Park, you look at it on a map, and you're like, oh, it's just up that way. I could just bike to, no, you can't. No, it's not a thing. And I think I really like that. I think that I love large cities to visit, but I am actually a very small country mouse. And DC is that right mix. There's the saying about DC that it has southern efficiency and northern hospitality, which basically means that we're slow and rude. And I think as someone, one of the challenges about being back in Chicago is that, like, we keep having, like, Uber drivers or waiters or stuff who want to talk to us. And I'm not used to that. Like, our Uber driver is just like, oh, so what are you guys up to? And we're like, why do you care? That is not your business. And then that's a really nice thing of them to be asking. But part of me is like, to go back to DC, where no one will ask me anything or talk to me about anything, which it sounds terrible. And DC in many ways is terrible, but it's my kind of terrible.
And obviously the weather didn't feature in that division at all.
I like Chicago weather a lot. I like cold, because if it's going to be cold, like, I want it to be cold. DC, it'll be 40 degrees for 3 months, and it's terrible, because it's just gray and gross. But this is like, yeah, like, you need to survive. Like, you need to make it through. Like, I wore 2 coats 2 days ago, and I was like, yeah. It was amazing.
I don't understand it. So that's a wrap on Chicago Hot Takes.
And for all you listeners, make sure to go check out Chicagoland by going to our website, uc3p.org, and also go listen to The Weeds.
Jane, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We really enjoyed your company.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
And that's a wrap on another episode of UC3P. Credits go to Sowmya Karun for producing and co-interviewing, Fanmei Xia for engineering, and me, David Raban, for co-interviewing and editing. Also, special thanks to the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics for bringing Jane Coaston here as an IOP Fellow. Our assistant production managers are Arjun Mota, Olu Ogidan, Sowmya Karun, and Suo Wu. Our communication director is Thomas Krasnation. Our finance director is Donovan Harvey. Our publisher is Haz Yano. Our intro music is Knockout 2 by Datubi, and our outro music is Yes Yes Y'all by Matt Large. Our cover art was designed by Shirin Raban. If you want to hear more podcasts, check out our website, uc3p.org. And if you want to contact us, our email is theuc3p@gmail.com. My name is David